Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Whether you're looking for a quiet table for two or hosting a large crew, Peacock Alley is the place to be in downtown Bismarck, and a proud sponsor of Plain Talk, North Dakota's #1 political podcast.
I mean, we're trying to get people to actually listen to this podcast.
This iconic grill and bar is where Bismarck history, delicious food, one-of-a-kind drinks, and big ideas come together. Peacock Alley, located on the corner of 5th and Main, downtown Bismarck.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. So happy to be with you. And you know, at the end of the last show, we closed out talking about a live event that we are working on in Bismarck. And when I say live, by the way, we're not live streaming it. This is our first time doing this, so we didn't want to add that extra complexity. So it's going to be recorded live at Peacock Alley, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Chad, I learned that there's going to be a wing special while we're on.
Yeah. Here's the deal. Nobody's coming to watch us record the podcast. They're coming to eat the cheap wings at Peacock Alley.
Right.
What are we, February 18th? Is that the date of it?
19th, I believe.
19th.
Yeah.
Are we announcing that yet? Did I do cheap wings?
So that's guest Mayor Scott Decker weighing in. And by the way, I love their wing deal. They have left wings and right wings. So everybody can choose the wings that they want. I don't know if they have any middle wings.
I would think, Rob, during the legislative session, those right wings sell a lot faster than those left wings do.
I wonder how you tell the difference between a left wing and a right wing. I don't know.
I've got some thoughts. Let's talk offline about it.
Well, we'll save the discussion of chicken anatomy for off air. You know, we got a great show. In a moment, we're going to be talking with Dickinson Mayor Scott Decker. Interesting situation. Obviously, it's a very local issue for Dickinson, but I think some of the issues are things that communities across North Dakota and probably in some ways across the nation are grappling with, which is, you know, how to deal with, you know, the balance between allowing, you know, the maximum amount of public involvement and transparency and everything, but also the fact that they got business to get done. And it's hard to balance these things. So we're going to be talking about that in a moment. Also coming up later in the show, I wrote a story about I wrote it after watching Travis Fink, who will be our guest. He is the executive director of the North Dakota Council on Indigence, basically North Dakota's public defenders. And you know, he gave his testimony for his budget before the Senate Appropriations Committee and was talking about the degree to which their office is underfunded, to the point where we have been on a borderline constitutional crisis. And the reason why it's a constitutional crisis is because people who are charged with a crime in the American criminal justice system are guaranteed a right to an attorney, right? We all know that. If you've watched Law and Order, you've heard them say that famous Miranda warning. Everybody has a right to an attorney. And so we have to provide an attorney. And we're not paying enough, or we're borderline, we're not paying enough or making enough resources available to have enough attorneys to do this and to do it effectively. So we're going to have Travis on to talk about that later in the show. But for now, let's get to our first guest, Mayor Decker. Mayor, how are you?
Man, I'm great, man. I woke up. I always, when people always ask, I always, my response, and a lot of times I get a chuckle. I say, hey, but I woke up. It's a great day.
That's right.
Yeah. That's I look at it.
What I wanted to have you on about is your city has gone through, and I guess is still going through, a recall effort. Now, I think everyone on this call would say that we like the recall process, right? It exists for a good reason. I'm glad it's there. And citizens who feel like they want to avail themselves of it should. That's why that process exists. But in Dickinson,
I agree.
in Dickinson, we had a situation where I feel like the process was being abused. There was a group of, I don't know what you want to call them, gadflies, activists, who were convinced that the city did not issue or did not conduct its oath of offices correctly. I don't know that that's true, but that's what they were convinced. They launched a recall effort. The recall effort targeted our guest, Mayor Decker, also targeted Commissioner John Odeman, and also targeted another member of the commission, Jason Friedrich. Am I pronouncing that right? Is it Friedrich?
It's Frederick.
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 Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
The only one where they got enough signatures was Jason Friedrich. And by the way, going through this, there was another whole legal scuffle over whether or not, because Dickinson has a home rule charter, and I guess there's some language in local policy about recall efforts, but the state of North Dakota also has state law governing recalls, and so they had to go and get a legal opinion from the attorney general, because the state's levels are higher for the signature requirements, were higher than the local level. So we had to get that settled. Anyway, what happened was they got enough signatures for Jason Friedrich, Commissioner Friedrich, and they were going to schedule a special election has been scheduled. And part of that process is obviously, well, who's going to run? And there's a deadline by which people who obviously the incumbent is going to be on the ballot. And then there's a deadline by which other people who want to challenge the incumbent were going to file. Now, one of the organizers of the petitioning process, a gentleman by the name of Seth Hegelson, had said that he was going to run. And that makes sense, right? If you're leading the recall effort, you get the signatures. It makes sense that one of the leaders of that effort might be the person who wants to run. Only he didn't run. He didn't file. And so now what the taxpayers in Dickinson are left with is a remarkable situation where they're on the hook for a special election, which is going to cost tens of thousands of dollars to administer. And I mean, that's just the cost of running an election. If you want to do it right, that's the cost. But it's an unopposed election. Now, somebody could still run a write-in campaign, I suppose. But you really have to wonder, what is the point of going through all of this and running and creating an election that's unopposed? So first of all, Mayor, in recounting all that and getting our listeners caught up to this, so maybe you haven't been following, did I get anything wrong? I mean, is that basically the situation?
No, you broke it down pretty correctly. There was more than just the oath. When they filed the petition with the Secretary of State, they listed a multitude of things against myself and other commissioners. They're allowed to put whatever they perceive they were wrong on this petition to the Secretary.
What was it? Was like desecration of graves was one of the claims?
That's correct. We had a unfortunate event that happened this around Memorial Day last year, where individuals were told they could keep their personal items around gravestones until a certain date. And the individuals that clean up our cemetery were not made aware of that date and were told to go out and clean up the cemetery. So they removed these personal items. The petitioners and other individuals within the city believe that we made a direct order to go out and remove these personal items and throw them in the garbage, and somehow we desecrated the graves. And it was very emotional. I apologize for it over and over. But how government works, how real local government works, and how people perceive it actually works. I don't show up on Monday morning and start issuing edicts like this is what every department's going to do on Monday morning at 7:30 in the morning. We have layers, and all those layers, there's layers within the layers. In public works, there's buildings and codes and buildings and sites, and there's a layer there. There's an individual that's in charge of the cemeteries that has all those individuals that work underneath. And if the right word, the right orders aren't issued and there's confusion in there, that's how something like this happens. And it did not come down from the commission. That's day-to-day operations. And it was just, again, it was very unfortunate that it happened at that time frame. And we set up the appropriate method so people could retrieve the items. And if any of the items were damaged, they could file for us to pay them to fix those items.
So Mayor Decker, first of all, thanks for your service. I think that what people don't understand is local government is often the most difficult elected jobs because you're so close to the people. So when your streets don't get plowed, they know who to call. They're not calling the governor. They're calling their city commissioner and county commissioner. So I'm going to make an assumption here, Mayor Decker, is that the folks who did this recall are likely often critical of spending that the city of Dickinson does, may have supported a measure to eliminate property taxes. And now they made a decision to do something that's costing the taxpayers tens of thousands of dollars. And there's no repercussions to them. The taxpayers are just out this money. Is that correct? That they don't have to do anything to pay for this election. They collect these hundreds of signatures. The taxpayers pay tens of thousands of dollars, and that's it.
You are correct, Jeff. And on top of it, we have to run the election by ourselves. We are not getting any help from the county. We are printing ballots. We are renting a facility. We are taking city employees and having to make them election officials. And that's all extra costs because they're taken away from their normal job. Now they have to oversee this election, and then they have to do a ballot count, and to ballot count and verify whatever write-ins there are, because Commissioner Frederick is going to be the only one on the ballot. So yes, they could put write-ins in, but now they're going to have to verify the write-ins. If they do mount this write-in campaign, well, I haven't seen anything. This election's right around the corner at March 11th, and these it's just going to take time. And yes, there are no repercussions against them.
And to be clear, nobody on this call is against the idea of going through this expense and going through this for a legitimate reason. I mean, if there was somebody on the city commission who had been doing something, breaking the law or doing something truly untoward, then sure, this is part of the process. This is an expense we have to pay, and we should happily do it. I guess to me, it's very frustrating. And I think this is where it sort of branches off into things I think Chad and I have talked a lot about. I think it's trends that we've been sort of witnessing in local government are people who show up and they show up for their issue, and they're very, very passionate, and they're quick to make all sorts of accusations and assumptions, but it becomes very clear they don't really know how the process goes. They aren't really paying attention, but yet they're very happy to waste a lot of people's time and a lot of resources on nonsense. And frankly, I mean, Mayor, I have gone back and watched. I don't often watch the city of Dickinson's proceedings.
What?
I don't live in Dickinson. No offense to the beautiful city of Dickinson, but I don't often watch your proceedings. But I got to tell you, I have watched some of your recent public comment periods, and the sort of things that are happening, I almost don't even want to describe. I mean, it is just outright racism and bigotry at times. It is, and I have to wonder again, if you're a member of the community who has shown up at your city commission meeting because you're concerned about a local tax issue, or you're concerned about a zoning issue, or you have business that you need to testify before the committee, and then you have to sit through that. Now your city is making some changes to that process. And I'm sure you're doing it mindful of the fact that public input is important and it is something we want. But how do you draw the line between what is good and what is bad?
Well, and you're spot on when they throw out the allegations. And if you've watched the meetings, I've gotten to the point, I bite my tongue. I am patient but my patience is, and I think other members of the commission and community members, our patience is wearing thin, because we are trying to do the business. We are trying to keep the city on track to do great things. And the challenge is when it's just repeated allegations that we're felons and we're doing all this stuff illegally, and it ultimately it's their goal is to get at one member of our staff. And somehow, if they can remove us and replace us, they can eliminate that one member of staff, because it's this personal vendetta against that individual. You're, as I said in the meetings, take it to, if we're felons, take it to the proper authorities and prosecute us. To stand up there and just, with your sophistry and continue to just, berate the members of the commission, berate staff members that we're doing all this stuff, well, then take it to the AG's office, take it to the state auditor. We get audited every year by Mr. Gallion. Every year, his office, they audit us. Ask for the files. Ask to see. I have been on the city commission for 10 years. And to your point, Chad, I have been on the city commission for 10 years. You know how many people have shown up to a budget hearing in 10 years? 2. And that's because we are going to cut their funding, because they are part of one of our sales tax items. We are going to cut their stipend, the funding for their stipend. And those are the only 2 people that have ever shown up in 10 years. And we as a city, if you look back, anybody can look back, we have held the line. People complain about property tax, and there's a whole discussion. I sat through that meeting down in Bismarck this week about the proposed property tax measures and everything. We as a city have held the line. We have been at $5.7 million in property tax the last 7 years, going on 8 years. We have not adjusted that. And there's a multitude of factors that come into that. We've had large industrial complexes worth $60-70 million just close their doors. This is when you're dealing with oil complexes that large, and the consolidation that happens in the oil field. All of a sudden, one company says, you know what, we're going to move this whole operation from Dickinson up to Williston, or to Minot, or to Watford City. And then another operation does the same thing that's worth $48 million right beside it. They close their doors. Now you're sitting on over $100 million in valued property. And then it changes hands. And in our case, the one property benefited the city greatly, because it went from being this huge industrial complex and getting turned into the CTE, which is just phenomenal. And Dickinson is offering all these opportunities. And I would just invite you, gentlemen, if you ever want to come out to our CTE, it is phenomenal. This should be the example, but it is an anomaly too, because they bought this huge industrial complex and they were able to convert it and provide all these opportunities for these students, not only at the high school level, but also at Dickinson State University. And but guess what that's worth now? That's worth 0 on our tax rolls. So we have to take the extraordinary measure when we're looking at these large properties, when they're rebought or repurposed, and now they're worth nothing. So we have to kind of eat that, but that valuation has to get spread then out across the city. And when you explain that to people, now you over $100 million in valued property is now spread out across everybody. We have to all absorb it. So we have to hold the line. But then by us doing that, the challenge is how do you make up the difference? Because people still want the services. They still want their snow removed. They still want X and Y. And now we're looking at possible caps placed on us by the state, a 3% cap. And we're one of those cities, we've held the line.
Right. So one of my concerns, Rob mentioned these folks who show up at meetings in Dickinson and make derogatory comments. That's not unique to Dickinson, right? I mean, I think we're seeing that all over the state at school board meetings and And I think it leads to a couple different things. I mean, Rob mentioned the citizen who wants to come to a meeting and have their voice be heard. They're not going to sit through that crap. It's hard enough to find time to go to a city meeting. But then you're going to have less people who want to run for these offices. You're going to have less people who want to work for the cities and counties and school boards because, like you said, I mean, nobody wants to go to work and get berated by some person about conspiracy theories and that kind of thing. Which leads me to my question. One of the things that Rob has talked about, the reason for the recall is that the oaths were not properly taken in Dickinson. This is something I've heard on a statewide level, like legislators don't take the oath properly. And what, maybe this isn't for you, Mayor Decker, maybe it's for Rob, but can somebody explain to me, to the listeners, what's the accusation here? Because I assume when you got sworn in, Mayor Decker, you didn't determine what the process was. Somebody else determined that process. So what's the accusation here?
They are saying, well, there's multiple here, Chad. There's they'll make accusations that we didn't take it on the right date. Like we're sworn in on July 2nd, but we should have been sworn in on July 1st. Well, our commission meeting fell on the 2nd, and that's when we had our reorganization for the city commission after the election in June. And typically we waited. In the past, we'd always had that very next meeting in June. We have 2 meetings. We generally the meeting in the beginning of June doesn't fall around the election time, the primary time, and then the second meeting. We would have this reorganization meeting. Well, we switched it to the first meeting in July. And the other thing is that we filed it on the wrong piece of paper and we didn't put the notary stamp in the right area. And it wasn't a multitude of different things. Well, we're using the oath of office that is provided to us from the League of Cities. And does it vary? I haven't looked at it close enough. Does it vary what's provided by the state? It may well vary, but we are all taking our oaths in good faith. You raise your hand and you stand in front of the community and you swear that you're going to uphold the Constitution, the state Constitution, and the Home Rule Charter of the City of Dickinson. And we've all taken it in good faith. We're not up there. We're not up there doing something nefarious. And then we file it. And again, it's coming down to, the interpretation on what piece of paper it's on correctly. I was in the United States Army for 21 plus years. And I took multiple oaths of office re-enlistment upon my re-enlistments. And what is just, like I said, I bite my tongue a lot, but I have somebody get up there and lecture me on upholding the Constitution and upholding the state Constitution, and that I'm doing something nefarious. And that man hasn't sworn anything in his life but unto himself. And that's what's frustrating. And no matter what, it goes back to this. They think they're right. They think there's something nefarious going on, and well, that's why I've told them take it to the proper authorities. Charge us if it is.
This sort of ephemera is a hallmark of this sort of political activism. And there's actually legal precedents for how to deal with this. Not that long ago, we had a lawsuit filed that tried to invalidate, I believe, the 2012 gubernatorial election in North Dakota. 2 of the candidates, Paul Sorum and Michael Coachman, who I think combined to get about 1.5% of the vote. Michael Coachman was his lieutenant governor candidate. Paul Sorum. So their ticket got about one. I think it was less than 2%. I think of the statewide vote. They asked the Supreme Court to invalidate that because the candidate forms that the Secretary of State was using didn't list the lieutenant governor right, and it was something where the law said it had to be this way and the form wasn't this way. But obviously, I mean, everything was done in good faith, and the state Supreme Court threw it out. And the reason why is you don't invalidate what at the state level were hundreds of thousands of votes that were cast for the Republican and Democratic candidates and throw them out and assign all the votes to the people who won 1.5% of the vote based on that sort of ephemera. Should the law be filed? Yes. But is there a point at which common sense just has to kick in? Yes, there is. Absolutely. We don't invalidate all the votes that the good people of Dickinson cast to elect their mayor and elect their city commission because of the notary stamp wasn't in the right place on the page. You don't do that. That is anti-democratic, and it's ridiculous. And frankly, if activists are focused on that sort of thing, if that's their argument, then it's a pretty good indication that they don't have a lot of other good arguments. So anyway, it's me editorializing a little bit, but I'm very frustrated by this. I use our open meetings and open records laws for a living. I am a big believer in government openness and transparency. And I don't think people understand how difficult it is to keep our open records laws in place and to keep our meetings open, because there is always pressure to shut them down because it's easier to do the public's business out of sight of the public. It just is. It just is. But the thing is we can't do that. But when people abuse it, they're strengthening the case to shut it down. And I know nobody on this call wants to shut any of that stuff down. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying when you abuse these processes, you make it more likely that they're going to go away.
And if there truly is, Rob and Chad, if there truly is somebody that needs to be recalled because of whatever issue, a true issue, if you keep doing this, it's almost like that cry of wolf. Now, all of a sudden, somebody does need to be recalled for whatever reason. And you're out there circulating and you're saying, hey, we're going to recall so-and-so. And everybody's like, oh, here's the person. You know?
I get upset when I hear people say everybody's corrupt. All the politicians are corrupt. Well, it's not true. First of all, it's not true.
Oh.
But when you say that, well, they're all corrupt, and then someone comes along and they're actually corrupt and they're actually a problem, it's hard to convince people of it because it's like they're going to shrug their shoulders and say, yeah, but they're all corrupt. So who cares?
It is frustrating. Honestly, when back to Chad, to your point about trying to find individuals to run. At one point, you don't want to get beat up anymore. It wears on you. And the other individuals see that and they're like, how can you do this? How can you do this? And I can tell you this. The Dickinson City Commission, every one of those commissioners and past commissioners, they have a passion for this city. But if you continue to just beat them down and wear on them, after a while, the good people are just like, you know what? I don't need that. And individuals, there's individuals out there that, if you just indulge me, it's a funny story. I had a plumber over at my house, and he's working on my plumbing, and he looks at me and he goes, "Aren't you the mayor?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm the mayor." And he goes, "I should charge you more." I said, "Really? Why should you charge me more?" He goes, "Well, for all the money you make." And I said, "Humor me." I said, "Please humor me. How much do I make?" And he goes, "Well, you have to make 6 figures." And I said, "After taxes, I take home $440 a week." And he looked at me. He said, "Don't be offended, but why do you do this?" And I said, "Well, it's not for the pay. I grew up here. I served my country, and I made a decision after I retired from the Army that I wanted to be involved, and I wanted to help improve the city of Dickinson as long as I'm alive or live here. And I'm not doing this, and nobody on the city commission is doing this for money." Right? And I would take that across the state, that a majority of our elected leaders are not doing this because they're getting rich. Also,
if they're doing money, they're in the wrong business. They could go down and be a barista and make way more money than being a local elected official. That's crazy. But this idea that we're just recalling people for the sake of recalling sort of reminds me of, on a national level, this new thing where we start to impeach presidents the second that they get into office, right? That we don't even, it doesn't mean anything at some point when everybody's working through the impeachment. And I do worry because there are real examples of laundering money or doing unethical things that at some point we're going to say we can't have this process anymore. We have to make the process much more difficult because people are wasting taxpayer dollars. And then, Rob, to your point, I can't watch local government meetings in Bismarck anymore because of the open comments period, where it's just people just go up and rant about craziness. And God bless everybody who's running those meetings, because like you, Mayor Decker, most of them do hold their tongue even when they're being called names and being called unethical.
And by the way, not just the elected officials either. I mean, there's a lot of very good people who are clerks or city whatever, who are they're just trying to do a job. And by the way, a lot of those people are every bit as passionate, if not more so, about their communities as the elected leaders, which Mayor Decker, I know you know that as well. I'm preaching to the choir here, but it is so frustrating to see good people want to leave office because of some of this stuff. And by the way, I mean, we just saw when it comes to like legislative pay or like reimbursing people for expenses, we just had kind of a kerfuffle this week where there was a bill introduced to, sort of expand reimbursements for meals and stuff for lawmakers. And some people kind of flipped out about it. And then the bill ultimately got withdrawn. And I'll admit, I didn't look at the bill, so I guess I can't speak to it as a good bill or bad bill. But I do get frustrated when we treat legislative pay that way, when we treat local official pay that way, or reimbursements. Most people who are doing this, they're losing money. They could probably be richer if they gave up public service and just focused on their careers. They're giving something up to do this in the state of North Dakota. Maybe that's not true on the federal level, but it's true in state government in North Dakota, and it's true in local government. And I wish people would be a little more sensitive to it. But there's that feeling out there where they're all crooks and they're all getting rich, and we just want to throw pies in their faces all day.
Well, I tell you, I'm out in the community every day, and I try to meet with different groups every day, and I usually hear the best details about how the city operates when I go to these coffee groups, and I sit in with them. And had a gentleman a few months ago. I sat down, and he said, "Wow, the mayor's taking the time out of his busy day to join us and have some coffee." I said, "Yeah." I said, "I want to hear what's on your guys' mind and everything." And a gentleman just looking at me, just glaring at me, and he goes, "Just a bunch of crooks, bunch of dirty crooks taking money under the table." And I kind of sat back and I sipped my coffee, and I said, "God, I'm going to feel bad when that Ferrari shows up next week." And everybody around the table just laughed, and he just kind of sat there just glaring at me. And I'm like, "Do you really think that's what's happening?" I mean, in the past, like you said, Rob, there is individuals that have done things that are illegal, but ultimately those individuals, even from local to federal level, they get caught. I mean, you see it all the time. And I can tell you the amount of time that our commission and our staff puts in is, I am so appreciative of how hard they work. I really am. And it's just, I'm very proud of our community, as I'm sure most mayors are of their communities, and we're all working hard to make North Dakota the best place to live. I mean, Rob and I were kind of talking before this all started about the weather up here getting colder and everything. And I've lived all over the world, and I've told people for years, our weather here in North Dakota is inconvenience, and they kind of chuckle at me. And I'm like, yeah, it gets cold, but it rarely kills people. You get the occasional tornado that might have something, or you get a blizzard where somebody makes a mistake, they get stuck in the ditch, and they get out of their car and they're going to walk. And then it's not a good fate. Or there's the accident from the ice or something like that. But I've lived in parts of the country where a tornado came through and just wipes out whole sections of cities and kills tons of people. And you look at those poor people over in California right now and what's happening. We live in a great place. Sure, it gets cold. Sure, you have to drive a little bit slower because there's ice, but it's an inconvenience. We get to stay in, we get to chat a little bit more with family in the wintertime. And you know what we really do? We really, really appreciate summer in North Dakota.
Nothing will make you appreciate summer like a North Dakota winter. Mayor Decker, I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys letting me come on. Call me anytime. I'm sure there's I'm going to be down at the legislature quite a bit this following a bunch of different things, tracking things, and I think all this stuff's important that we should pay attention.
Yeah.
Looking at property tax and looking at different things that come down from the legislative body that affects us at the local level. So I always like to be down there and give my 2 cents. And hopefully I'll run into you gentlemen down there, and maybe we'll share a chicken wing.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
All right, welcome back. Just finished up our interview with Mayor Decker. And Chad, I mean, at the end, I really liked, he was kind of going on about how much he loves North Dakota. And I understand why he was doing that. I think for somebody, I mean, the way that they've been under fire, for people just questioning questioning without any really good basis to question their motivations and just about everything. He's just trying to make the point. We're just people, right? Yes, we're elected officials. Yes, we're politicians. We're also just people that love our community, and we're showing up, and we're trying to make sure that the snow plows are showing up and the garbage is getting collected, and we're going to have enough room down at the landfill, and all the other things all the other, boring work that we take for granted. They're just trying to make sure it gets done and gets done efficiently, and maybe hold taxes down along the way.
Yeah, and I get frustrated with what he was talking about in terms of people thinking that elected officials get rich on the job. Having had a spouse who served an elected office, a father and a brother, rest assured that made their professional lives, the regular professional lives, much more difficult to serve in those capacities. And they did it because they wanted to give back. So, and to your point that you often make when people say all politicians are corrupt, that frustrates me. Not everybody's a great leader, but people are giving of their time to be great public servants, much like our next guest.
Well, exactly. And by the way, when people say that, it becomes, they say it over and over again, and it becomes the boy who crimes his wolf. It's sonic satiation. You just say it over and over again, and then it just loses all meaning. There's all sorts of things. We were talking about when we're lowering the flags, and we get to a point where like nobody knows why the flags are lowered anymore. It loses all meaning. Anyway, that's a topic for another time. We're going to be switching gears here. Travis Fink is the executive director of the Commission on Legal Counsel for Indigents. I think I mutilated his job title when I introduced it in the last segment. That's the correct one. Executive director of the Commission on Legal Counsel for Indigents. You can basically just say they're the public defenders. When you hear that famous Miranda warning, you have a right to an attorney. This is the safety net to make sure that people are getting those attorneys. Recently, because his organization, they're I guess a state agency is the way to describe it. They got to go before the lawmakers in Bismarck, and specifically, one of the committees they got to go through is the Appropriations Committee, because they're asking for more money for their budget. They want to get funded. They want to be able to pay people. And the story that our guest Travis told the lawmakers is one that ought to make North Dakotans sit up and take notice. And again, the problem with the criminal justice system is most of us are never going to be in the criminal justice system. Certainly not at the scale that, to the point where we're facing a serious criminal proceeding. I mean, most of us, it's going to be a traffic ticket or something like that. But Travis's office handles 80%. This is one of the statistics he cited during his testimony. They handle roughly 80% of the state's felonies. They're going through his office. And they are at a crisis point where he mentioned that we were perilously close to a constitutional failure. And what he meant by that is that in one part of the state, the southwest part of the state, I guess it's Dickinson Day on Plain Talk, but in the southwest part of the state, they were very, very close to having to tell the court that they simply could not take any more clients. And at that point, with the courts trying to assign people to public defenders, and there's no public defenders available to assign them to, we have a constitutional crisis because those people have a constitutional right to legal counsel. So anyway, I'm going to stop describing this problem that Travis could do a much better job of describing. Travis, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Rob.
Did I get all that right? Am I doing a good job?
Yeah. Yeah. What we had provided to the Appropriations Committee is out in Dickinson, we have a 2-attorney office, and one attorney left our employment to go somewhere else to make more money, as we commonly hear when attorneys leave our employment. And when that attorney leaves employment, we have a bunch of cases we need to find a home for. And the reality is we were struggling to find anyone to take those cases. We've not been able to replace that full-time employee. So we've tried to find private attorneys who would be willing to step up and take cases at the limited rate we can pay them to cover those cases. So thankfully, we were able to cover those. But if we have a couple really busy months, I'm not sure we're not right back in the same situation.
So, Travis, kudos to your team at the appropriations hearing. I thought you guys did a great job. As a matter of fact, during the hearing, I emailed Rob and said, "Hey, we should talk about this." And he said, "I was watching the same hearing. I already filed my story." And so, obviously, it's something that both of us are paying attention to. I thought the conversation about investigators and the fact that you only have one investigator in the whole state, that investigator, it sounds like he makes somewhere in the $50,000, to $60,000 range, could go and be a police officer and make $20,000 more. To me, that's a real problem. And so can you talk about the role of investigators in your office? How many do you need? How are you going to go about hiring those folks if you get the appropriations?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chad. And good morning. I guess I only greeted Rob, so good morning to you.
I'm used to it. I mean, Rob is so needy.
That's it. Well, also that's a plain talk tradition of not introducing Chad.
No, so the reality with investigators is not only are we required to provide attorneys to represent individuals when they're determined to be indigent, we're also required to provide constitutionally effective representation. And part of that constitutionally effective representation is we have to investigate the cases. With the number of cases that my attorneys are covering, we don't have time a lot of the times, to go to crime scenes, to go and interview witnesses. And an attorney really should not interview witnesses on their own anyways. They should have someone else doing that. So historically, the commission has always used private sector, private investigators to do that work for us. The problem is we've not been able to really increase our attorney pay. And so we can't pay investigators more than we're paying our attorneys to handle the cases. So with the amount of money we can pay for private investigators, we're not able to get that many private investigators across the state willing to do the work. So we've looked at having to bring them within our offices. So obviously our budget request was to get an additional 5 FTEs, which would give us 1 investigator in each office. Governor Burgum and Governor Armstrong, both in their recommendations, recognized we need to expand this program. They both recommended 2 FTEs, which, hopefully would at least give us 1 in the West and 1 in the East, so we could start dividing some of the work a little bit. But the reality is if we don't investigate the cases, we may end up handling the cases again as an attorney in a post-conviction type proceeding, because everyone is entitled not only to a defense, but the constitutionally effective defense. So that's why we're trying to move towards those investigators. There's also the ABA 10 Principles of Effective Public Defense Delivery Systems requires that defense attorneys should have access to things like social workers and mitigation specialists and private investigators. We were the last state-run agency in the country to get investigators on staff when we got them last session. So now we're trying to build that program. And next we'll be looking for those other positions in order to really move us to where we need to be constitutionally effective.
I can actually speak to the investigator side of these things, because for 10 years, that's what I did for a living. My father had a private investigation firm. He was a former Alaska state trooper. And we did a lot of stuff. We did a lot of insurance fraud and stuff like that. But we did a lot of criminal defense in particular, because my father, he had a lot of real world expertise there. I also did it. And a lot of what we did, and you have to realize, even having an investigator in the East and the West, and somebody who has been a private investigator in North Dakota, the witnesses don't come to you. Maybe now with Zoom and Google Meet and video calls, maybe you can do interviews that way, but it's not as good. You have to go there. You have to be on scene. You do need to see the scene. And the thing is, if the defense doesn't have their own investigation, if you think the state has all sorts of investigators, the state has the police departments, right? And the sheriff's departments, and they go out and they do the investigations, and that's great. They should. But the problem is they're focused on finding evidence to convict. And they might not do a thorough interview with a witness that has exculpatory evidence. They might not do a thorough review of a scene that's important to the crime that might have because they're focused on stuff that supports their contention. Of course, the defense has a different set of priorities, and it makes sense to have an investigator. I remember one time, and this was in the federal system, we were appointed to be public defenders. It was an arson case that happened up on the Turtle Mountain Reservation, if I'm remembering right. And there were, we counted it up, there were 25 federal investigators who had worked on this case in some capacity, some more than others, obviously, but 25. When we were appointed by the federal court to be the investigator for the attorney who had been appointed to be the public defender, we were given a budget of $1,500. We live in we were based in Minot, and part of that $1,500 is to pay for us to get up to the Turtle Mountain Reservation, which is about an hour and a half drive from where we were. I mean, that's a 3-hour round trip just driving, just windshield time. So anyway, I think people hear private investigator and they think, well, that sounds like an extravagance or something. No, if you want, to Travis's point, constitutionally effective defense, this is something you got to have. Now, Travis, what are you asking for? I mean, from the legislature, what's your wish list? I mean, what's a perfect world for you?
And so our main priority that we're focusing on right now is trying to get some sort of parity within our compensation structure. So, turnover we look at turnover in a calendar year. We average about 25% turnover every calendar year. So we're retraining 1/4 of our workforce every year. Additionally, when you look at over the course of this biennium so far, and we still have 5 months left in the biennium, we've turned over 43% of our employees. So when you look at that, I mean, that's almost 1 out of every 2 employees we've had to retrain. And so when you lose an attorney in a situation, obviously we've got to reassign those cases, and then I've got to train a new attorney, and that becomes really expensive. Additionally, when we lose an administrative staff, then we're having those attorneys perform those administrative functions, and then they can't take as many cases. So we need to get to a point where we're at least being competitive with state's attorneys and other government agencies for talent, and then have a way to keep those people. So we have put in a request for a compensation package. Additionally, we continue to struggle to find contractors. Our contract rate is $80 an hour. I always tell people, I encourage anyone to go talk to any attorney and see if they'll pick a case for $80 an hour. It's a difficult conversation to have with people. Fortunately, we have, some real good people in the state of North Dakota who are willing to do the work, for really not much pay, but to help us out. So, without that, we would have failed several times over already, but there's people just willing to always step up and help out and make sure the system continues to run. So we've got a request in to increase the contractor compensation to a percentage of the federal government. So that rate would consistently change when the federal government rate changes. So we remain consistent there. And then the 5 investigators, to add those onto the staff. And the reality is it's not just our attorneys that are underpaid. Our investigator is underpaid. So, we've looked at what state's attorneys are now starting to hire investigators. So we're looking at what they're paying their investigators, trying to compare it a little bit to those traffic or law enforcement type positions. Again, sometimes we have to recognize that those are different jobs, shift work versus working in an office and things of that nature. So we're always trying to balance that out. But what we're trying to do is be competitive. I like to say right now, we're not even we're not worried about a level playing field. We're not even in the arena right now. So what we're trying to do is at least get us to that level playing field, because I think there's people that truly do want to do this type of work. It's one of the few types of attorneys you can be where you can truly make a difference in someone's life. And, that's a huge recruiting tool that we have. And we get a lot of people that come work for us to do that. And then also we get a lot of people who, quite frankly, are very concerned about individual rights and individual liberties. And really, as a public defender, that's what we're protecting, is those, we represent an individual against the great weight of the government. And that's an awesome responsibility. And so we really appreciate that. And I think by getting these compensation packages, if the legislature gives it to us, and I will add both Governor Burgum and Governor Armstrong did recommend to give us some money to increase our compensation, would really, I think, start to move the needle a little bit. And maybe we're not having to come and talk about failing, and we can talk about some of the good things we're doing.
So Travis, can you talk about, obviously, I've heard, I think I got the hearing where there was reference to your attorneys having 50 to 100 clients at one time, the only one investigator. Rob brought up the Dickinson story where he potentially couldn't have offered. I assume, I'm not going to ask you this, but I assume in those situations, things fall through the cracks. You can't be perfect in every one of these clients. I know your staff is working their tails off, but can you sort of look forward a little bit? And, if you continue to have 43% turnover in a biennium, if you only have one investigator, what does this look like? If you can't offer representation to that person in Dickinson, I assume the state gets sued at some point, right? And I would assume that's going to be far more costly than giving you the money you need now in order to pay attorneys and recruit the staff and maintain the staff you need. So what have we seen in other states where there's been lawsuits? What does this look like moving forward if we don't make a change here?
Yeah, you don't have to look real far away to see states that have been sued. I believe there's litigation currently ongoing in Idaho. There's litigation ongoing in Wisconsin. There's litigation in quite a few different places where different advocacy groups have recognized that, these are constitutional requirements. And when states aren't meeting their constitutional requirements, there's repercussions, but I'm very careful to, I'm not a Chicken Little type. I'm one of those that believe, as long as we have air in our lungs, we've got an opportunity to make a difference. But, some of it is I don't want to, advocate that we should be making these changes because we're going to get sued if we don't. We should be making these changes because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
It's what the Constitution requires us to do. And all of us as public servants or legislators, take an oath to uphold the Constitution. And these are one of those constitutionally mandated things. So, that's the way I look at it. I'm cautious to provide we need to do this or we're going to get sued. But the reality is it's out there. Counsel at initial appearances is another one. So hopefully there'll be some legislation coming this year to allow us to have attorneys at all initial appearances across the state, because right now we're not doing that to the extent we should be. And the Supreme Court has been fairly clear that you should have an attorney. Our own rules of criminal procedure provide you should have an attorney at initial appearances. So we have brought some legislation to take a look at that too. But again, all of that takes money. All of that takes resources. And, we're ready, willing, and able and want to do things the right way. We just need the partnerships to get across the goal line.
It's obviously North Dakota's got a lot of conservatives, and they hear that and they don't want to spend more money, and sometimes because unfairly, spending money in this realm is perceived as spending money to help criminals get away and get away with it, right? That's not fair. That is not a fair characterization, but I think that's how the public perceives it. But I think there is an argument to be made here about being penny wise and pound foolish. Right. I think the lawsuits aspect is a part of it. And by the way, I looked specifically when I wrote about your hearing, I looked specifically at the Idaho case. That was filed in 2014. It's been going on. Idaho has been dealing with that for a decade. That was not cheap. for the state of Idaho. And so if you're concerned about saving money, let's avoid that. And I know you don't want to overstate the case there, but that's a real risk. But another thing that we talk about all the time are mental health services. We are struggling with finding resources. Maybe we're putting people in prison or in jail just to get them treatment sometimes. I was talking to a defense attorney the other day who made this point to me, and it wasn't something that I had realized. But an attorney isn't just an advocate for their client in the courtroom. They're also an advocate as they navigate some of those programs that are around the criminal justice systems, like the behavioral health systems and programs. Attorneys are a lot of times very instrumental in trying to find their patients' beds. So funding this doesn't just help us in the courtroom, where, again, constitutionally, we're supposed to be providing attorneys and effective legal counsel, but it also helps with that problem as well. I mean, it's kind of two birds, one stone. I that kind of opened my eyes too. I mean, I'm somebody who's very focused on this and cares about it a lot. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think that's an important thing to remember.
Yeah, I think, as you know, the state's done a lot of work to try and move resources upstream with creations of things like Free to Recovery and Community Connect, and we put a lot of money into those programs, and those are good programs. What I advocate all the time is we spend more time with a lot of those individuals than a lot of the other people receiving a lot of the money, right? So when we look at, us being able to help someone find the right treatment, our attorneys try and do that, but we're also limited by the fact that we have to be in court and everything else on all these other cases. So that's really where we've started to look at how do we get, some social work help with that. And we've done things like we've spoke with the Zone Directors Association, and we've tried to work with the Human Service Zones if a client needs help with housing. We've made contacts with Job Service. If our client could, obviously if they're not employed, they could benefit from a job. How do we get them into second chance job fairs and things like that? So we've made some of those connections. The reality is, though, I'm having to retrain my attorneys all the time on that. So we're not able to establish those programs consistently. So, I think by moving some of those funds upstream, we could move some of those funds upstream with us as well, which would save on the back end cost.
Yeah.
We know that. We know that it's cheaper, for every day we can save in jail. We hear all the time about how our local jails and our prisons are overcrowded. Well, if we have those resources on the front end, we're the ones that can help guide them into the types of appropriate treatments or, appropriate situations.
It becomes like a priority thing, right? Like if you're an attorney, you only have so many hours to spend with your clients. And the number one priority is what's happening in the courtroom, right? The proceedings against them in a criminal setting. Some of that other stuff, I got to think lower down on the priority list. So if attorneys start having to start triage, some of that other stuff takes a back seat.
Yeah,
is that fair?
Absolutely, it's fair. There's not enough time in the day, and like I said, we're in court all the time. And then when we're not in court, we're getting new clients. I'm averaging, most of my full-time public defender in my offices are taking between 18 and 25 cases a month, and that's a mix of felonies and misdemeanors. That's a lot of cases. And, the new national workload standards came out, and if we're to impose those workload standards, I would need 4 times as many in-house attorneys and contractors. So we're woefully behind where we should be.
Travis, I thought one of the interesting things is that it wasn't just you standing up and advocating for your budget, but you also had the state bar and also the State's Attorneys Association, the prosecutors. Why is this a big deal to the prosecutors?
Well, I think, and they've said it, before, is the reality is they also want to make sure, in order to protect victims' rights and everything else, that when a conviction is entered, that it was entered correctly, right? I mean, we're all part of the judicial system. I try not to call it the justice system because I struggle with that sometimes. So I call it the, criminal legal system. But I'll start saying justice when everyone's funded equally and everyone gets the same access regardless of what they make. But the reality is, they have an interest in that. Similarly, the conference, or the judicial conference in the state of North Dakota, which is all the district court judges and referees, they also signed a resolution that we submitted that, supports our budget, because everyone recognizes that, You know, we're a cog in that machine. And if we don't turn, those cases don't get processed. If I don't have an attorney, the judge can't move forward. There's litigation right now in a county in Washington where the public defender had just said, we can't take any more cases. We don't have time to handle them. And there's people that are on a waiting list and their cases are just sitting there. Well, that's not justice. I mean, justice delayed is justice denied for everyone. You know, so those are the real possibilities that we face. That's why people, I think, are supportive of it. And that's why I think we've gotten, you know, the support so far and the attention so far at this legislative session that we have.
Well, I tell you, when the prosecutors and the defense attorneys get on the same side of an issue, it's maybe time to take notice and say something needs to happen here. And the prosecutors, by the way, I mean, they work with the defense attorneys every day. I've spoken with prosecutors who had nobody from Travis's office, but had somebody on the defense side who wasn't doing a very good job. And how much more difficult that makes. I mean, you might think that the prosecutor wants an incompetent defense attorney, right? Because then they can just go and dunk on them in court and win their case. But they don't want that. Not because they don't want to win their case or they don't believe in their cause, but because it makes it more likely that that case may be overturned on appeal. It makes the whole process more difficult if the other person on the side, and not just maybe that they're incompetent, maybe they're just burned out. Maybe they just don't have enough time to do the job that they should be doing. The prosecutors want that too, and I don't want to speak for them. Obviously, I'm not their spokesperson, but I have a feeling that's why they showed up at that committee hearing and were supporting this, because they want people with resources on the other side too, so that they can do their jobs effectively and well, and feel satisfied that they're achieving the right outcomes. Travis, that's all the time we got for you. I really appreciate you guys coming on. I think I am probably so biased in favor of the my good friend, the Attorney General, all the time likes to not ridicule me, but accuse me of having too many friends in the defense bar. And I tell him it's kind of the family business a little bit. I think criminal defense attorneys, I think they are our first line of defense when it comes to our civil liberties. I think there's a lot of problems sometimes that we have those debates in a criminal context. And I think sometimes we have a hard time removing the criminal context and realizing they're really fighting not just for their clients' rights, but everybody's rights in a lot of ways. I just think you guys are the salt of the earth and absolute heroes. And I hope you get what you need from this legislature.
I appreciate it, Rob. And we do have a lot of great people that do great work with really some insurmountable odds sometimes, but the kudos really belongs to all the people in the trenches doing the work.
Thanks, Travis. Good luck.
Thank you.
Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Well, welcome back. First of all, I want to just throw out a shout out to public servants. You know, we had two pretty good ones on the show. And listen, I get it. If you're from Dickinson, maybe Scott Decker's, Mayor Decker's made some decisions that you don't like, and that's democracy. But just to everybody in that vein, Travis Fink is not an elected official. He's just a public servant who's doing a tough job and trying to do it well, super cares about it. I think the man's a hero. I think Mayor Decker's a hero. I think he's somebody who cares. And again, maybe you voted for the other person in the last election. That's okay. But I think the people who show up, who put their name on the ballot, who go through this process, who sit through those at times interminable and completely infuriating public comment sections, the people who are doing this work, they really, really matter. Because if they're not showing up and doing this work, who is? And somebody's got to do it. And I'm glad that they're showing up and doing it. And honestly, Chad, I texted your wife this week and told her, even though Aaron and I over the years have been at loggerheads on issues, she was a former lawmaker, obviously a Democrat. I'm not a Democrat, but I was glad she stepped up. I'm glad we had somebody like her in the state and the legislature. I'm glad we had somebody like her at the Rural Development Office, which is a job she's leaving because Donald Trump won the election. That's a presidentially appointed position. And just shout out to people like that for putting their names forward, being serious about it. And again, it's not about agreeing with them all the time, but it is about appreciating the fact that they're willing to step up and do the job.
Yeah, so I mean, I didn't know that Aaron had done an op-ed until Rob, you pointed out to me that it was in the state's largest newspaper, and so I thought what she laid out in that op-ed was really, really great. One of the things I liked about it, and I'm going to brag about my wife a little bit, is she's not complaining about the last presidential election. She served at the you know the at the president's what's the word that they use at the call of the president?
At the pleasure of the president.
Pleasure of the president, and her president lost, and now today's her last day in that job. I will just tell you a really quick story. Last night, Aaron and Evan and I went up to Belcourt because the Turtle Mountain tribe was recognizing Aaron for her work with them, and so a bunch of people from Aaron's office and some of the tribal leaders and tribal staff were up there and just had dinner, and they gave her a quilt and other things. And I will tell you the admiration between the tribal officials, the staff at Rural Development, and Aaron about the projects they'd worked together on. I mean, they built that recovery center up there at Turtle Mountain together. Aaron, as we drove into Belcourt, pointed out the water treatment plant and how Rural Development was involved in that, and the sausage making plant near Herdsfield. I can't remember all the places, but like literally driving up to Belcourt, her pointing all the places that Rural Development and the folks in her office have been involved in. And it's really cool because I think so often we give government spending a bad name, but there's really great nonpartisan folks working together. And Aaron and the folks up at Turtle Mountain and her team last night really showed that. And it was great to be able to see how much they appreciated the work, because the conversation we had with Mayor Decker, these folks aren't getting rich. I mean, Aaron's got it. This was a great job that she was at, but you know, a lot of the elected stuff isn't great paying stuff. And the appreciation of folks working together, again, not always agreeing on things, but they saw a need in a community and they worked together to make it happen. That's what we're supposed to do.
One of the most consistently frustrating things to me when I watch the general public, or even, I mean, people who know what I do for a living, right? And so I meet them socially, and they're maybe not very political, but they talk to me. And, you know, the way I see people talk on social media, people don't follow this stuff very closely. They take government for granted. You know, they drive by a water treatment plant or a sewage treatment plant, or they drive down a road, and they just take it for granted that it's there. And they don't understand the amount of work that goes into doing it, and not just doing it, but doing it right, and to making sure it works, and to make sure along the way that it's cost effective. And trust me, I as a fiscal conservative, I have plenty to say about the government doing things more expensively than it has to and everything else. But you also have to remember they're doing it by committee, and that's not one of my favorite sayings. Is a camel is a horse designed by committee. It's hard to do things through the democratic process. It's hard to do things by committee. That is one advantages sometimes that dictators have. I want to pull out my hair when people say, well, we ought to do things like China. Well, China can do things sometimes because they're not a democracy, and they can just steamroll people's rights and force people to do things. And we don't want to live that way. So sometimes government is inefficient because democracy is just flipping hard. And sometimes it's expensive for the same reason. But I would really like to get back to a more civic-minded, public-spirited sort of America where we are appropriately skeptical at times, and we want transparency, we want accountability, but also sometimes we recognize it's just people doing a job, and we're all trying to do the best, and most of us care about this country, and most of us want these things to work in our country to be better.
And I want people in rural America and rural North Dakota to think about how truly dependent they are on the government. We drove by a hospital in Rugby. That would not have happened if it wasn't for the government's involvement, right? The water treatment, the addiction center, all these different things. Like, so often we say government is bad, you know, stay out of my life, while completely not recognizing the role, particularly in rural America, that the government plays on keeping your community a place where people can live. The taxpayers alone in Rugby can't build a hospital. In that region, can't build a hospital without the help of the government being part of that. And that's part of being in a society, right? I mean, and again, we don't want to overtax people. We don't want to spend whatever. But there is a role for this, and we need to recognize that.
Even at a more fundamental level, one of the things Democrats like you, Chad, sometimes like to throw in North Dakota's face is the fact that we have a lot of federal spending that happens in North Dakota.
You do.
And the bulk of that is roads. That's just the reality of it. It's roads. And the nation has an interest in good roads in North Dakota because we produce a lot of food and a lot of other products that feed and power the rest of this country. And those products travel on those roads. So there is a federal interest and a national interest in people in California paying for roads in North Dakota. There's nothing wrong with that. But you also got to remember when you're being anti-government and then you get in your car and you drive on that nice government road, or maybe not so nice. Not every road's great, but
our roads are pretty good compared to most states. I'll say that. We should be proud of that.
I don't have anything to complain about. But, you get on that road and you drive into town to go to the grocery store, or go to the movie. You're driving on a government road. There's a whole process that went into that, and which I guess just gets back to me. We take this stuff for granted, and I'm not saying you have to like your elected officials. I'm not saying you have to agree with everything that they're doing, or that you have to just not question the government. I'm not saying any of that. All I'm saying is don't take it for granted.
And be nice to each other, right? I mean, I think showing up in a meeting and calling people names and whatever, and these conspiracy theories, I mean, it's not based in reality. Most people just want to serve their community. They just want to plow the damn roads for it. Yeah. That's what they want to do.
That is my plow the damn roads party. And even when we were talking with Senator Heitkamp on a previous show about who's a centrist and who's not a centrist, and that's kind of my definition of a centrist right now, is people who just they're not taking the process for granted, and they're not in that mode of just thinking, well, everybody's corrupt, so I'm just going to carry on like everybody's corrupt, and even accept corruption among people that I support because everybody's corrupt anyway, and that's just how it works. It's not. First of all, that's not reality, and second of all, that is a good way to turn all of this into a race to the bottom. So. Yep. A few quick words. Some interesting developments in the legislature this week. I was talking a little bit in between the segments that it kind of seems like the culture war bills have some headwinds this session.
Yeah, I mean, we're still early in this thing, Rob, so I don't think I'm going to put the nail in the coffin quite yet of these things. But, I mean, the 10 Commandments is still working its way through, and there's other stuff. But we did see the ridiculous resolution against same-sex marriage get pulled yesterday. Evidently, Representative Dwight figured out the Supreme Court isn't waiting for their opinion.
But it interested me that he pulled it because that's never been an obstacle for them before. I mean, they were more than happy to tilt to that windmill. It makes me, and again, it's early going, but it makes me feel like something's different this session. Maybe, or maybe I'm being too hopeful, but it feels a lot different.
I agree with you. I hope Representative LaFleur got a woodshed and he's starting to bring some of these folks into it, because that bill got terrible press. The bill about Casper wanting to get reimbursed for all his meals while he's at meetings. By the way, I'm a proponent of paying legislators more and city commissioners more and school board people more. But I think Representative Casper, the optics of that is not good, and I think that's what they figured out there.
Maybe. Although I feel like we could unclench on that issue a little bit. I think sometimes we dunk on them for proposing stuff like that, and it's a little unfair at times.
Here's what I don't understand though, Rob. He was looking to get reimbursed for meals when he already gets the per diem. Isn't the per diem to cover meals? That's the point of it.
In fairness, I never got a chance to even look at his bill before he withdrew it, and at this point, I'm not going to look at it. So, just in general, the public's reaction, and frankly, the reaction of certain political commentators and pundits at times, is a bit much. I think it's a little unfair.
Good politics. You can feed that baby, or you can feed a legislator. That's good politics.
But good politics doesn't always make. Good politics sometimes contributes to the problem we just got done talking about.
But might be truth to that.
But I am also the Blue Laws bill failed spectacularly, which surprised me because that, I mean, eliminating the Blue Laws barely got over the line.
Don't you think legislators were just ecstatic that it did get over the line so they didn't have to deal with it anymore? And then, Heilman brings it back. I think there's lots of legislators who are like, what? I don't want to do this anymore.
Why are we doing this again? Yeah, Representative Matt Heilman from Bismarck. I wonder if part of it, I have a little last thing we'll discuss. I have a little theory about why this may be happening. If this is a thing where maybe the culture war bills are facing some headwinds this time that they didn't before. And I think it may, if it is happening, I think it may have its roots in the primary last year, where we saw some of the loudest culture warriors, Representative Brandon Pritchard. He ran a slate of candidates against incumbent Republicans, castigated them on their votes on culture war bills, and mostly lost. And part of me wonders if there aren't a lot of Republicans in the legislature, or a lot of Republicans in that majority in the legislature right now, who aren't feeling as scared or as intimidated right now.
Well, and we'll see on 10 Commandments. We will see on the anti-trans stuff. We'll see on some of those things if that holds true. I hope you're right, and I hope you're proven right during this session.
We'll call it a hypothesis for now.
Yeah,
and we'll see if the proof is out there, because we're very pro-science on this program. Hey, I just as I wrap up, we got a lot of feedback on our show about chronic wasting disease. A lot of people saying, why don't you have the other side on? And unbeknownst to them, I was already working on getting the other side on. I have talked to a gentleman called Dusty Backer. He's one of everybody I talk to says he's kind of the guy. He's kind of the mover and shaker, the person who's doing the most activism on this. I had a phone conversation with him yesterday. I've invited him on. He's deciding whether or not he wants to come on. If he doesn't come on, I'm going to try to find somebody else from that side and have them on. But we are trying, because I do legitimately, even though I think Chad and I will probably disagree with the person who eventually comes on, I think we probably made our positions clear. I 100% want to have a conversation and also see maybe is there some common ground we can find on this. I don't know that there is, but I don't know.
And what am I like? This isn't my wheelhouse. I don't know anything about this. Is there something I'm missing after talking with our guest on Wednesday?
I had somebody yesterday who said that Brock had written our questions for us, and that the whole thing was staged, which I thought was, and so they were imputing that you and I knew so much about it because he had written our questions for us. And
Rob, I will tell you a little secret for the listeners. I don't write down my questions before I come on this pod.
I don't write. I write down. I may write one or two that I don't want to forget to ask.
Yeah.
But generally, it's just a conversation. And I also got blasted a little bit, like, how do you know so much about hunting? Well, I don't hunt a lot now, but I have hunted. And I was reading that Facebook comment while I was sitting in my living room looking at my bearskin rug on the wall. I have hunted. I have hunted moose. I have hunted caribou. I grew up in a place where we used to hunt to feed the family. I don't do a lot of it in North Dakota because it's a very different type of hunting than Alaska. I'm not running down hunting in North Dakota, but for me and my father, it was just different.
And dear listeners, I know nothing about hunting. I want to say that again and again and again.
But I have a locker full of guns. I come from a hunting family. Our background is mostly in Alaska, but I do know a thing or two about some of this and the culture, and I do think it's important. Anyway, we are working on getting that on. We're always interested in having both sides. And please, by the way, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I really wish they would talk about another side of this issue, and I know a guest or I want to suggest, reach out to me. We're more than happy to talk about that and to book people. We want to have conversations with people. That is the whole point of doing this. And frankly, I think it's why Chad and I have so much fun doing it. It's fun to have these conversations.
If they have a comment or they want a perspective and they don't have a guest, call the line.
Yeah.
Right?
Call the line.
Leave us a voicemail like Ashley from Jamestown did.
Ashley from Jamestown. And now I'm wishing, if you continue listening, you'll hear the phone number. I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, do you want me to continue talking until you find the phone number, or should we just assume it's going to...
Well, I think we're both filibustering a little bit to see if Matt's going to pop it up on the screen, but maybe he's not going to. If you listen, it's at the end of every show. You can listen to it there. You'll be hearing it ahead in a little bit. Call, send us a text, send us an email. However you feel most comfortable getting in touch. We love that feedback.
And if you're at, like Ashley from Jamestown, we talked about her voicemail, and Rob wrote a column about it as well.
Yeah, I spend a ton of time interacting with people. I spend probably an hour or two of my day just on correspondence every day with people interacting. It's one of the reasons I love this job. It's one of the reasons there wasn't a lot I liked about talk radio. I think the medium kind of lends itself sometimes to a lot of stupidity. But one of the things I really liked was interacting with callers and interacting. And when you really got a good conversation going and people are calling in and you're hearing this and you're hearing that, and then like an elected official calls in or something, that was so fun. That was so wildly fun. And it is the one part with the podcast. I like everything else about the podcast. The one thing I miss is sort of that live feedback. But anyway, that's it. We're going to put a pin in it. Thank you so much for listening to this show. Once again, the live show in Bismarck, we'll have more information on that as we get it booked. I'm sure maybe we'll create a Facebook event, but you're going to want to show up. At the very least, show up and get some of those delicious Peacock Alley wings, right? I mean, the worst that happens is you show up, we're super boring, but you get
you get to eat some wings. You get to pay for the wings, but they're a good deal.
Maybe some left wings, maybe some right wings, maybe be wild and get a little bit of both, left and right wings.
And a little moderate wing.
And I think if I read the special correctly, you also get a pound of Dakota fries with it. So
that seems like a lot.
That seems like a lot, but it's January. We got to pack a little extra weight on to get through these winter months.
That's not a problem for me.
It's not a problem.
I'm trying to unpack some of those pounds.
Yeah. You and I need to unpack some pounds. Our listeners are probably more svelte. They have a little room. They need to put on some weight. Come out. It'll be a lot of fun. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. We'll save the discussion of chicken anatomy for off air.